Join palms. And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. Good evening, everybody. It's funny because there's two things on my mind that I kind of want to talk about tonight, and they really kind of play well together. The original thing, and someone had asked me to talk about, was non-attachment, which is a good one, and I'll get into that at some point in time. But please don't attach to me talking about that, because even though I've said I'm going to talk about non-attachment, I may not actually talk about it. There's a perfect example of non-attachment. Like maybe you're sitting there thinking like, okay, yes, I want to understand non-attachment, and I may never talk about that tonight. And there's your lesson, right? The other one I was going to talk about is really right effort, right diligence, and how hard we work on things. Or how hard we don't work on things. And these are both practices, when you look at the Buddhist teachings, that are really important. What is the effort that we put in? How hard do we actually work on whatever it is we're doing? Right? Not just the spiritual path or Buddhism or whatever you want to call it, but everything in your life. How hard do we work on whatever it is we're doing? And in that effort of working very diligently at it, can we not attach to any outcome whatsoever? And the reason they play so well together is that, at least the way I perceive it in practice, is that regardless of what you're doing, if your effort 100% is focused on what you're doing, there's no time or space or room for any attachment to any outcome whatsoever. You're just focused on what you're doing at that moment. Right? All the emotions kind of go away. All the cravings and desires for outcomes go away. All the expectations go away. And you're just fully present in whatever it is you're doing. And that effort and that presence, for me, has just been a beautiful practice over the years. Like I said, regardless of what it is. So it's kind of all I wanted to say on that right now, but I may touch on that stuff later. So we'll start with the meditation practice. A couple things I'll tell you before we begin. For those who are maybe sitting for the first time, nothing's going to happen to you. Right? You're not going to float away, most likely. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Okay? Don't judge your practice. We judge things all day long, what we look like, what we wear, what we eat. We're constantly in this judgment mode. And this practice of meditation is learning to go beyond judgment and Just abide in sensation of breath. Very much like the effort I was talking about, and very much like the non-attachment I was talking about. You're just going to focus on sitting and breathing. And if you're just sitting and breathing, you're not attached to anything that may or may not arise from that. Don't judge your practice. We fall into this often throughout our days, judging, critiquing, right, wrong, good, bad. It's how we spend most of our days. And this practice is just going to be sitting and breathing. I'll say things periodically to wake you up because you've fallen asleep, or remind you that you're lost in thought and bring you back to the present moment. If you have to cough, simply cough. Coughing doesn't ruin anything. It just, if anything else, it woke somebody up. So thank you very much. Posture, you want to be comfortable. If you're on the cushions, often it helps slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed, hands can be on the knees or in the lap. If you're on the benches or chairs, also just trying to sit up straight. Shoulders relaxed, hands on the knees or the lap. If you need to move, simply move. Movement also doesn't make you a bad meditator, it just means your leg hurts. If you have an itch, simply scratch your arm and come back to stillness. Work on not getting wrapped up in what you look like or how you sit. And focus on training the mind. I will guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, don't expect anything. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, we'll settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Knowing throughout the practice, you'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. These are not distractions, not disruptions. Simply what's happening around us as we sit. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. We'll start with gently guiding your attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. And as the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Keeping the mind alert, aware of each sound, each thought, each physical sensation, yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. And with the body still, rested, the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, just as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move, And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, and calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the Buddhist statue or incense or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada. This is dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than anyone in this room who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for every one of us in this room, regardless of where we come from or what we believe in and where we think we're going, our whole life is filled with things that happen. We react. More stuff happens, more reactions. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way we respond to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with the mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not necessarily easy. It's not necessarily fun. Training the mind is probably the most difficult thing you'll ever have to train. But it's also the most important. Taking care of mental, emotional health and well-being is the foundation of our entire lives. And too often we leave that for last. Spend so much time trying to do everything else. Work here, work there, get this, get that, go here, go there. As long as everything in my life lines up well, then I'll have time to take care of my mind. Should be the first. Start your day. Take care of your mind. Start your day. Give yourself time to settle. Start your day. Understand how important mental, emotional health is. Whatever else you're doing, the 3 minutes, the 5 minutes, whatever you need in the morning to just take a few moments to slow down, it's worth it. Because the madness that you're bringing into your day isn't beneficial. So many people get wrapped up in this hurry, 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 rush in the morning, hurry up, get out, get this, get that, go, 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 to get wherever. And then that cycle just goes all day long, and then people are exhausted, they're tired, they're frustrated, they're irritated. Again, nobody in this room is that way, but I'm just throwing these things out there as possibilities. Maybe somebody here had a rough day, you know? And so we get stuck in these cycles and these routines. And I'm constantly talking about closing that gap to where the way you sit now, the way you feel now, the way you practice now, that quiet, that stillness, that focus, that concentration, even with this scattered mind that you all just had for 20 minutes. Right? The wandering, racing mind that you just sat with for 20 minutes didn't do anything. You just sat with it. Some pleasant thoughts, some unpleasant thoughts, some neutral thoughts. Thoughts arise, they pass. Thoughts arise, they pass. Thoughts arise, they pass. This is your entire day. But during this little exercise that we call meditation at what we call a Buddhist temple, everybody just sat. Nobody got up and acted out on their thoughts. So I didn't see it unless you did it really quietly. I didn't hear it, you know. And so that's the practice. And if we put this practice into everything we do, kind of coming back to right effort, right intention, if each moment throughout our day, or right effort and right diligence, also driven by intention, but if we focus moment to moment to moment on what we're doing, we don't get so wrapped up in the emotional games we play. I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't want this, I don't want that. Triggered so quickly by every little thing. Because our mind is wrapped up somewhere else. Likes, dislikes. I keep trying to go back to talking about right effort and non-attachment, but I'm just not there. So, I warned you earlier, though. But I will say, I think diligence has been, for me as a practitioner, the greatest practice. Whether it's regardless of meditation or Buddhist practice or anything you're doing, if you're doing something, work hard at it. To me, the effort is way more important than the outcome. And I look at the outcome as very much tied to the attachments of how we want the world to be. And we often skip many steps in between, and we just have an idea of how we think things should be. For whatever reason, I have so many people in my surrounding life right now that are suffering because of the actions of others. They're suffering because of the actions of those they love. And there's this heavy, heavy attachment to wanting others to be a certain way. It never works. Others will be how they are. All we can control is how we are. But that requires a lot of effort. Because if you're engaging with people, family, friends, relationships, strangers, whatever it might be, we're so quickly triggered by their actions. We're so quickly triggered by their words. We're so quickly triggered by their expressions. Have you ever gone into like a potential confrontational meeting or dialogue or whatever it might be with somebody and told yourself, all right, I'm going to stay really calm. I got this. And then 6 seconds later, like that whole plan you had is gone. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, surprisingly enough, the person you were about to engage with didn't do exactly as you had hoped they would, to allow you to stay calm. And so if we just put the effort into what are we like in every situation, what are our thoughts, what are our words, what are our actions, it all comes back to that. What do we think, what do we say, what do we do? If we work so hard on that, the rest we begin to observe. And it never means that what's happening around you is going to be what you like. But this practice allows you to not get so emotionally disturbed by all of the things around you that you don't like. Non-attachment. Questions? Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with? Yes. That was quick. Did you write it down like 3 weeks ago, or?
I've had it, like today. I've had it in mind for a while now.
Did you even do the meditation we just did? Were you just like, would you hurry up, shut up, and get to questions?
I needed to word it right.
All right, go for it. I'm with you.
So I've been struggling with the idea of freedom. So a lot of with what you were just saying, the idea of freedom from views within the frame of social justice and advocacy. Because that's an arena in which anger and reaction is a catalyst for a lot of conflict change. And I can appreciate the value of acknowledging that everybody has their own views and everybody thinks their view is right, just as how I think my view is right.
Oh, your view is right, just so.
And I guess what I'm struggling with how I can honor that while also trying to create concrete radical change, in which in many ways I could possibly be trying to impart my views on other people while trying to uphold my beliefs of compassion and equality and advocacy. Because in a lot of ways I wouldn't have the freedoms that I have today if it weren't for the anger and reaction of the people that have come before me.
Great question. I don't know what you wrote down, but that was really good. Was this in a couple things? One, I want to say this before I forget. One of the things I loved about what you just said is you said, and if I remember exact words, you said, I could quite possibly be trying to impart my views. So let's remove the quite possibly and just settle with like, yes, you absolutely are. And that's fine. Like, so was this, just to give it some context, and I'll probably start with this and then go forward, but was this in reference to when I talked about Thich Nhat Hanh's definition of nirvana being freedom from views?
Yes.
And then you're bringing that into social justice and things like this, yeah?
And sort of the idea of accepting, as you just said, that you can't change people.
Sure.
To not be attached to people changing their views and how that can come in conflict with the idea of like social justice.
Making change, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with a couple extreme examples just to put it into context, and then, we can maybe work backwards from there, because it's an extremely sensitive topic, question. It will require a very in-depth look at your own actions, your own attachments, your own cravings and desires to having the world function how you want it to. Because that's really what you're talking about, right?
Absolutely,
You see issues, which I'm painting a picture that is opposite right now of what most people in here may see. In that there are millions and millions and millions of people in this world who would absolutely disagree with every issue you bring up.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the reality, right? So the question is, well, let me start with a couple examples. The common one, and I may have given this one already, but when the monks were being tortured after the war, one of them was asked, what was your greatest fear while being tortured? And he said, my greatest fear was losing compassion for the individual who was torturing me. He didn't say being tortured was right. He didn't say it was good. He didn't say it was appropriate. He didn't say it was acceptable. He didn't say it should continue. He said his greatest fear was losing compassion for the individual who was torturing him. Now, what I take from that is that the moment we kick into anger and hatred, I'm actually, shock of all shocks, I'm reading a book right now, don't tell anyone. I don't read much, right? But I'm doing a talk tomorrow night at a church, and apparently the topic is I'm supposed to sit with some other religious person who probably knows a hell of a lot more than I do. And the book is Living Buddha, Living Christ. And I was like, I just found out not that long ago that I actually had, that was the topic, and I was like, I can pretty much wing just about anything, but I decided to actually read this book, right? And Thich Nhat Hanh, who I love his teachings and I've read a lot of his stuff, he talks about these things very directly, very specifically, that we can want change, right? And Thich Nhat Hanh was, nominated by Martin Luther King for a Nobel Peace Prize for his work that he did, right? We can want change. We can fight passively with compassion for change. But if we kick into anger and hatred and disgust towards the people that we want to change, we are bringing the same level of anger and hatred that they are bringing. I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh in this book, it really opened my eyes again to the extent that kind of this Buddhist idea of compassion is talking about. And he went into very specific people. Again, I'll let y'all figure it out and read it if you want, but he went into very specific people throughout our history that we should have compassion for, right? And I'm pretty sure there's not anybody in this room that wants to have compassion for these people, right? but what good does the anger do? When you feel angry, right? We've all been there. When you feel angry, how do you feel? Like, what does that do to you?
I mean, the argument that I guess I'm trying to make is that anger,
No,
it
wait,
can be a motivator, I guess.
back up. When you feel anger, what does that do to you? Think about it for a minute. I hear you. You want to skip the question and go to the answer.
Yeah.
When you feel anger, what is that like? See if you can describe that. This is an important piece because my guess is you're asking this question. I could be wrong. My guess is you're asking this question because you want to see change in the world, one, and you'd like to do it with compassion and not anger,
Yes.
right? So the first question, I think as a practitioner, if you don't answer right now, that's fine, but I'd spend the next 3 years exploring what is anger like for me.
It's fear.
It's right, and again, these aren't right or wrong answers. That's my point, is for you to explore what is anger and where does it come from and how do you react and respond when coming from a place of anger. And then I want you to look at that in comparison to when you feel love, when you feel compassion, when you feel this kind of open, spacious heart. What does that look like? And the question is, can you take the latter, the love, the compassion, that open heart, and work coming from that place, right, to make change? Because what I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh and great Buddhist teachers, and the Buddhist teaching specifically about these things, is that you're going to be much better off coming from a place of love and compassion than you are from a place of anger and hatred.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So first is to at least, I'm glad you said absolutely, but first to at least intellectually understand that you want to get to that place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to require you exploring, think about when we're in an argument, just a simple, silly argument. Forget social justice for a minute. But you ever argued with somebody over what you want to watch on TV?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Not a life-threatening situation.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go into that argument about what to watch on TV with anger and frustration and attachment, how easy is it for the other person to give in? Not so much.
Mm-hmm.
But if you kind of go into it as, I'd really love to watch this, and I know you'd really love to watch that, and maybe we can talk and understand why you love to watch this and why I love to watch this. And maybe I can begin to understand why what I think you watch is stupid and why you think what I watch is stupid. Maybe I can understand that first. And only from that place of understanding can we begin to try to, I think, create change. Right?
Yeah,
But it's so difficult.
it is.
Yeah? Go ahead.
I've been reading a book by Brene Brown, and she says that people are harder to hate close up, so move in. And so that's
Absolutely.
something that I've been working on a lot.
Our college group just showed a talk from Brene Brown the other night, and it's abs. Can you say that again, the quote?
People are harder to hate close up, so move in.
Yeah, people are harder to hate close up, so move in. And but going back to the only word you gave me when I said, what is anger? We don't want to move in because of why? Fear. Right? We're afraid to get close to those we don't like. We're afraid to get close to those who we see as doing disgusting, horrible things. Right? And I also understand that I'm sitting here, and any time I talk about any of these things, with just about every privilege in the book as I sit here, right?
Yeah.
So I can only come from that lens. But, someone who grew up as a spoiled, Jewish, white, privileged male, that's how I see the world. I'm stuck with that. But can I, as a practitioner, begin to understand, what does that actually mean to see the world that way? And how, if I have these privileges, can I work diligently to hopefully empower those who don't and create situations that bring people together, right? Because, things are pretty screwed up. They really are. And for those who are maybe new to Buddhism and you're coming at it from a very deep level, I think just on the very surface, for those who might be brand new to Buddhism, to understand that Buddhism doesn't mean you just sit back and allow things to happen. Often people think that, Buddhists, you just meditate and think everything is fine, right? No, the Buddha said life is suffering. So he clearly didn't say everything is fine. right? He said life is suffering. But, you know, the kind of coined phrase from Thich Nhat Hanh is engaged Buddhism. What is it like to bring these practices of, you know, mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion and engage in the world? And you're going to have fun exploring that.
Yeah,
And I hope you are successful.
thank you.
Yeah. So, you go to USD?
Yeah.
So that, are you familiar with their Institute for Peace and Justice, IPJ? Yeah.
Mhm,
Incredible program, and I'm sure
for sure.
you can learn a lot there, if not already. Yeah.
Going off of the same sort of theme, would you say that anger removes or erases compassion?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look technically, and that actually brings up something that I think is important, and you talk about anger being a motivator, right? So your question about does anger remove compassion? The Buddha taught very clearly that the first cause of suffering is our greed. The second one is our anger. And the third one is ignorance. These are called the three poisons, right? Greed, anger, ignorance. It's the second noble truth, which is the cause of suffering. And he said very clearly, we overcome greed with generosity. We overcome anger with compassion. And we overcome ignorance with wisdom. So the way you asked the question, which was, does anger ruin compassion? I like to look at it the other way around, that I hope compassion will ruin my anger. It's a long way of saying yes. But yeah, I mean that's again, I look at, the Buddha taught for 45 years, and the very first thing he taught was those Four Noble Truths: suffering, the cause of suffering, the ending of suffering, and the path. So the heart of his teaching was to cultivate compassion, generosity, and wisdom. And the anger as a motivator, I get it, and that can drive us a lot, right? I mean, we are all motivated to be happier, healthier, more peaceful people, or none of us would be here right now. That's why we do this. So that there's a strong motivation there. There's a strong craving. There's a strong desire to end suffering for yourself and those around you. That's what leads people to this practice. And I think next time you're motivated by anger, stop for a minute. Same thing like my earlier question, ask yourself, how clear is my judgment? Right? I mean, anyone ever been really angry and done lots of smart things? It doesn't typically happen. So I understand that anger, that feeling, can kind of stir something in you, but I would question if it comes out as anger, how it's going to be received. So somehow from the cultivation of anger that arises, can we turn that into compassion as it comes out? There's a great children's book called An's Anger. I think it's A-H-N or A-N-H. An's Anger. Beautiful kids book, animated, really lovely. I'll ruin it for you and tell you that he turns his anger into a beautiful red flower. So I'm sorry to be a spoiler. Yeah.
Would you say that perhaps it's not anger that's the motivator, but it's a form of extreme empathy?
Well, I wouldn't say it's anything. I was just repeating the way the question was. I think the question you should ask yourself is, what is your motivation? I can't tell you what your motivations are. The question was, can anger be used as a motivator? So I was just repeating that question. So I think for you to ask yourself, when you feel that you want there to be change, what is the emotion that is arising? Is it empathy? Is it anger? That's for each individual to explore, right? It's really hard to kind of fabricate or manipulate emotions. You could walk around all day and say, I'm going to have nothing but empathy for people, and then you're going to see things happening, and I promise you there's going to be no empathy there. There's going to be anger. You just read every book by Pema Chodron on compassion, and something happens and you feel nothing but anger. So I think it's hard to think that just because we intellectually tell ourselves we're going to be a certain way, that's actually the emotion that's going to arise. Critical is to watch what is that emotion that's arising, and what am I doing with it? How am I transforming it? How am I using it? And ultimately, is the emotion that's arising and what I'm bringing into the world, is it coming from greed, anger, ignorance? Or is it coming from compassion, generosity, and wisdom? And I think I love that, you start with the clear understanding that, yes, you understand everybody in the world has their own views. And that's where we got to start. If we don't start there, everything we're talking about now is you're never going to get there. Yeah, Bill?
I just keep coming to this fine line idea that I can have compassion for your anger and suffering, but I can't make you have compassion for your own anger and suffering.
Absolutely. And we can't make anyone feel any way. And we also, it's a really tricky one because, even when I look at the Buddhist teachings on this, so if I say to myself, I'm going to have compassion for someone else's ignorance, think about that for a minute. I'm going to have compassion for your ignorance. So am I the one to determine what is ignorance? So we have to watch that, I think, to look at these things very honestly. And even though, a certain group of people may agree one way, and we think that's wise, and we think everybody else is ignorant, if you go to that group of people and ask them if you think they're being wise or being ignorant, they're going to say they're being wise, and this group is ignorant. But yeah, you can't force anybody to feel or believe anything. And I think that's one of the most beautiful pieces of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, is that when people do things that you might view as, or we might view as ignorant, it's undoubtedly coming from a place of pain and suffering. And that's why they are bringing so much pain and suffering into the world, because they're suffering. That they actually think that to bring pain and suffering to others, there are people who think that that's good. And that's the harsh reality that we have to wake up to. And I think if we begin to wake up to that, then we begin to explore how do we make change within that. But definitely not saying it's okay or it's good. It's not. It's pretty disgusting, I think. So, other thoughts, questions? Nice light topics. Yes, sir.
It is. One of the things that came to mind where you're just saying that is that the thing with people's views is that that's highly dependent origination too.
Totally.
They've arrived at that place because of where they've come from and all the things that have gone on. And I do a lot of work with what you call rednecks,
Right.
right? People in the South and some it was just some crazy views, honestly. But they're nice people. A lot of them are really, really nice people. And they mean well, and just like was said before, up close, they would do anything for you.
Right.
And they will just spew the most hateful stuff to people that are right over there, just because they're not right here.
Yeah,
But there's some reason that they're there. I mean, and I think this term, I don't think you're ever going to change people like that with radical change. I think that having a skillful society is a massive shift, and it takes a little bit of pressure over a long time and a lot of patience, and hopefully the ship turns.
Yeah, and there's a book Tara Brach called Radical Acceptance, and even just that name, I think, is so critical, that we have to accept, and it doesn't mean agree with, but this is how things are. And what you just brought up, Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about in that book, where we don't know what people were taught when they were 5 years old, what parts of the country, what parts of the world, what religions they believe in. Every person who has turned into somebody horrific, right? Every person that has turned into someone who has done just really terrible things, they were just a cute baby, right? But we don't see what they were taught and how they were conditioned. We see the end results. And part of that, I think, understanding is to look at how are people raised and what are they taught? And I just think we can't change much until we really open up to exploring that. But to not quit, to keep pushing for change, because it's absolutely needed, right? There's a guy in prison years ago, one of my favorite quotes, he said, "Nothing changes if nothing changes." And it just was so simple, but so profound, I thought. Other questions?
Or how about some non-attachment now?
No. Now I'm just going to be a pain and not touch on it, just to like drive home the non-attachment thing. Yeah.
I'm a little older than you. I've done a lot of work. Active listening helps. That's your solution. Instead of anger, go with active listening and understand exactly what he says on the other end.
Yeah.
When I sit down with somebody who might hate migrants, then I sit down and I figure out that they might be just afraid to lose their job and they can't feed their family.
Yeah.
And then, so this way you can come to a middle ground and it will help you settle. But anytime you feel that anger arise, actively listen to the person talking.
And I think that a lot of times we find that from two different sides, the same things make us angry and the same things scare us.
So you have to come.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions, meditation, Buddhist practice? Go ahead. I can see it like,
I don't wanna hug you.
that's all right.
Alright, what about the past when it comes to biting you in the ass?
What about it?
You're trying to be present, you're in the present, you're being a good person now, and then something in the past comes up and
It's not in the past, it's in the present.
that's what I'm afraid of.
The past doesn't come back and get you. The past is gone. What's happening is in the present moment, and you are experiencing your karma that you have created, right? And I talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago, but that we often, they say all karmic seeds bear fruit. So if you did a lot of terrible stuff for 30 years and you do some good stuff for 10 years, that 30 years of stuff those karmic seeds are still going to play out. And, generating or cultivating what I would look at as healthy karma doesn't cancel anything out. So, the metaphor I use a lot is that if I got, a whole forest of some really not so great karma of things I've done, people I've harmed, right? Things I've said, and you got a couple little flower pots over here of beautiful little Bodhi-treed, positive karmic seeds. Man, at some point in time, that forest is going to come crashing down on my head. And the only way I'm going to be okay with it is to continue to practice cultivating the couple little flower pots over here. But if you're not strong with that practice, when that comes crashing down on you, you'll quickly default to doing things that you did that created all of those forests to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the mistake is thinking potentially, and just in general, not even to your situation, although it might apply to your situation, is like, well, I thought that was done. I thought I was free and clear from that. I thought I was doing all good now. But there's still some residual karma that's playing out. Could be this life, could be past lives, right? My focus always as a practitioner is to do whatever I can to not create a mess for the person that's going to take over this consciousness next.
Does that make you feel meaningless that you're not going to be the one that does it?
Say again?
Does that make you feel meaningless that you're not going to be the one that takes over the consciousness next?
No, because I'm not the one taking it over now.
Who is?
This thing that I call Jeff. And I didn't even call it Jeff, right?
Does that make you feel meaningless?
No.
Why not?
Why? Because this room is filled with people who are suffering. And I feel that my life helps people suffer less. And therefore, I don't feel meaningless. When I caused harm to people, when I caused people pain, right? When I was a mean, angry bully, then I felt pretty meaningless. You know, I love what the Dalai Lama says. He said, you know, life is about, helping others. And if you can't help others, at least don't harm them. And so I think that, I guess we are closing with non-attachment. The greatest form of, but for the record, I completely ignored Billy. I just want everybody to be aware of that, right? Totally ignored your question on non-attachment. But what you're bringing up as far as does that idea of consciousness that continues on make me feel meaningless now or meaningless in the future, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The greatest sense of attachment, when you look at what the Buddha was talking about, is this idea that the sense of self is some permanent thing, right? And so when I was born, and a dear friend of mine used to teach it this way, and I thought it was really beautiful. When I was born, I'm in the crib or whatever, and I'm sitting there and I'm screaming and I'm crying, and there are these people with these things called fingers, and they're pointing at me and they're like, Jeff, 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 Jeff. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm Jeff, right? And I get a name. Therefore, my whole life I'm identified as that person. Then that person has these parents and these brothers and this upbringing and these conditions. And so all of that tends to shape, a lot like we're talking about, this sense of self that thinks he's more important than others, that thinks he's better than others, that thinks he deserves more than others, because I wake up and I would think, well, I got to care about me first, right? And so the sense of meaningless came from thinking like, wait, if all of life is just about me, then what's the point? It wasn't a...
I have a question though. But
Yeah.
it's about all these other people too. They're all going to be dead also, right?
We're all going to be dead. I hate to break it to you,
Yeah.
right?
No,
But
I already know that. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm sure.
but my point is that once, your question specifically was about feeling meaningless, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be dead. We're all going to be dead, but we're not dead now.
Right.
And most of us, hopefully all of us, but some people might not, will make it through the night tonight.
Okay.
And maybe wake up tomorrow.
To what end?
What do you mean to what end?
To death.
Not tomorrow,
No, not tomorrow.
but eventually, yes.
Yeah.
We all die. The Buddha taught very clearly birth,
Right.
aging, sickness,
Right.
and death,
Right.
right? So while we are here,
Yeah.
while we have this ability, like I'm not just going to, good luck running around convincing everybody that you're all going to die so nothing matters. Because I guarantee most people don't think that way. So as long as people, hang on, you're stuck in your view.
I don't have a view. You're putting a view on me. I'm asking you a question.
Okay, fair enough.
Mhm.
Then go ahead with your question.
I forgot what it was.
Right? What I want, the way I am perceiving your question
Uh-huh.
is as if someone thinks, which is very common when people begin to explore Buddhism, that if life is suffering and we're all going to die, then nothing matters.
Right.
And what I'm trying to help you understand is that for basically every person in this room, it matters. For the people that you're asking about who are with all the social injustices in the world right now, it matters. For all of us who will be hungry later tonight, it matters. For the 10,000 people sleeping on the streets right now, homeless, 5 miles from here, 3 miles from here, it matters. So there might be a few people who think nothing matters, but majority of the people in this world think stuff matters.
No, I understand that people think things matter. People think money matters. People think a lot of things matter. But to what end?
To the end
it
that-
matters until I'm watching my grandmother die.
Right.
It matters until she dies, and then it won't matter to her anymore.
Well,
What's
again,
the difference between it mattering right now and then it ending in a few years? That's the part. Fill me in on that part.
specifically with your grandmother.
No, in anybody's life.
Right. Yeah, each individual has to ask them, my suggestion is for each individual to ask themselves, when they go through each day, what matters to me? What purpose do I have? What will I do with this life? What I'm hearing you want is an answer to the end game. And what I'm telling you is every human being in this room at this moment is not at the end game. We are at this moment. We are here now.
But how do you know how to play the game if you don't know how to win?
There's nothing to win. Right? I mean, this is a longer dialogue, and I'm glad you're doing Dharma Bum Life program, because you should bring this up with Ken in over 8 weeks so we can explore this. But with this practice, it's not about winning. I always say the thing that drove me...
How do you know how to play then?
Well, what do you want to play? I mean, it's not a game. Go ahead.
I wonder, just to ask you another question. I've had Christians say, for example, people are really strong believers, if there is no God, or you can't believe in Jesus or Christian theology, what's the purpose? Because the idea of this afterlife, going to heaven and lasting forever, is the reason they're on earth. So it comes from that idea that, there's something after death, for example. So are you asking like that? Like if we're not going to last past that?
What's your purpose?
To live my life to the fullest until let's
I don't know what that means.
So, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll let you go. Do you want to respond?
Can I jump in real quick?
No, wait.
What's your grandmother's purpose in life? Because that's who you're talking about, Rosalie, right?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
No, but I'm saying specifically, you brought up your grandmother. So what do you think your
To
grandmother
not
is?
suffer. To not be in pain if she's in constant pain. So probably her purpose in life right now is to die. Truthfully.
All right. So I'm going to bring... I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it back. I don't... What's your name?
Lena.
Lena. Did you want to respond to what he said about your purpose? Because everybody jumped in, and I want to give you a shot to respond if you wanted to.
Oh yeah, that was it. Sorry.
Live life as a fool.
For me, to
Which I still don't know what that means.
what that means. Maybe let's say in simple or short term, if I have some goals or some things I want to do, to be able to do them with full potential. Maybe to break it down, I meditate here to be more present. So to accomplish, let's say, day-to-day things with more presence than like thinking of 100 things and following through. For example.
Yeah.
That made it simple.
Yeah. No, Chuck, we're done. I'm not letting you jump in on this. Nope, we're done.
And I think you've all taken me the wrong way.
Here's my point. All right, Chuck, go ahead, and then we'll close. Go ahead.
At least my meaning has a lot to do with just understanding. That's it.
Yeah. So I think, and I'm just, I guess it's the beauty of sitting up here. I'm going to kind of wrap it up with this thought. And maybe people are taking you the wrong way. Maybe I'm not understanding your question. Maybe others aren't understanding your question. But, way too late now to get into a long thing, so we can explore it later. But I just want to say, I think it's important for each individual to ask themselves, what is your purpose? And many people come to Buddhist practice, I've seen this for 15 years, because they don't have a sense of purpose in their life. And that's what potentially led them to suffering, to not being peaceful and pleasant. And so people often come here, and I'm not saying this because of you, but I've seen it for 15 years. People come into this practice looking for purpose in their lives because we have been stuck in the routine, day in and day out, conditioned in the routine. And all of a sudden people will wake up one day and they're X years old and they're like, what is my purpose? And that is a very common thing for many people that come into some sort of spiritual path later on in life. And so I think it's important for each of us to ask ourselves as practitioners, what is my purpose? And I don't think it's about having a right or wrong answer, but I do think it's a healthy practice that for those of us who feel that we lack purpose potentially, to explore what would bring purpose into my life. What can I do where I would feel a sense of purpose in my life? And that was kind of why I started with what I said, because for me, doing this path and doing this practice and being a part of this place brings me a feeling of tremendous purpose without attaching to it. So I'm going to join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to Maddie during her time of suffering and her family and friends who also suffer at this time. May they all be at peace. May we all be at peace. So a few quick announcements before you all head out. Thanks for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up this place about 12 years ago, initially downtown, to introduce Buddhist practice to local folks. Those of us who lead, we're not nuns, we're not monks, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers, we're not looking for students. We're just practitioners. So we do our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that maybe make sense to those who show up. Every night we have different practices going on, different people leading from different Buddhist traditions. Every Thursday, 5 o'clock, we do a food redistribution program, preparing gourmet vegetarian meals and passing it out to people who sleep on the street. So anytime you think your life sucks and you kind of lack gratitude for everything you have, feed some of the people who sleep on a sidewalk every night, and it tends to put things into perspective. This Saturday, the first Saturday of every month, we have a day of silence retreat. It's 4 hours of silence, so if 20 minutes of silence is torture, then I strongly suggest trying it for 4 hours. Most people, to my knowledge, have lived. Out of the ordinary, not much. Friday night movie this week, Kung Fu Panda. So if you have yet to see the great Zen master in Kung Fu Panda, Friday night at 7 o'clock. I think it'll be the first animated film we show here, but we're doing Friday night movies every Friday now. So Kung Fu Panda. Yeah, we might even show the sequel in the future. So thanks all for being here. Good luck.